Each person, yeah, after your speech, do your crossword. That's why I like when you do that on the person's speech.
Okay, so we can do introductions really quickly. That'll be your judge. I'm supposed to be the timekeeper, but it looks like they're not here. So if you want to also keep your time, I strongly recommend that. So on your phone, on your laptop, whatever works best for y'all. I'll also be timing y'all. Would you want me to put up a minute when you have a minute left? I find that most students don't really benefit from that just because they're so focused like on looking on their laptop. But if you do, just let me know right now. I can do a minute. I'll hold those fingers and I'll know you have 1 minute.
I'd like a minute.
Yes, a minute.
I'd like a minute right now.
And then are you in the order that you're going to be going? Okay, so negative.
I'm sorry to let you know, but I hate you. Really sorry.
What did you just say?
I had to let her know that.
I can take an intense already.
What did you say?
You
said I hate you.
And then are you going, who's taking on the fourth speech?
I'll do that.
You're doing both?
That was so rude.
But, you know,
You are Alyssa.
Yes.
feels appropriate.
Your second speaker?
Yes.
And then whose section are you in? Are you Kendall's?
Yes.
Or Kendall? Okay.
Yeah, we're all rocking with Kendall.
Really rock.
No? Okay, so, yes, sir.
Are we gonna be standing, talking, or?
That is completely up to what you all want to do. It can kind of change on the team. There's like no real uniform ways. If you want to keep seating, you can. If you want to stand up, you can.
I think just because there's no podium.
Yeah, I
it might
feel
be
like-
kind of insane if I just stand up. It might be
So we're
kind of
sitting.
intense,
So we're sitting.
I guess.
Okay, cool.
I mean, yeah.
Guys, I wear heels like never, so if I stand, I'm going to fall down.
So, it's 3:31, so we're pretty on schedule. I can go a really quick pep talk. My students just debated like 20 minutes ago, so I understand a lot of them came up to me and were like, oh my god, and I was like, it's okay, you got it over with. So I know what y'all are going through. I also come from this department, so I also did this. As a non-debate person, I had to do this. So I respect y'all for being here and for willing to show up and come out and like show out. Okay? No judgments. Everybody just be respectful. I ask that things don't get too intense or too disrespectful. Right? We still want to make sure we're leaving good impressions on one another. So be kind, be good, and then yeah, impress me, impress each other. Perfect. Okay, whenever y'all are ready. And then again, I strongly recommend you also have timers. Would you like a minute? Like the minute notice or no?
That's okay.
You okay with it?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then, if I read it. Whenever you're ready.
The International Energy Agency agrees with the notion that the current path is not sustainable in its 3 pillars: economic, social, and environmental. It is because we agree with the International Energy Agency and wish to wisely invest into our future, we affirm that this House regrets the dominance of fossil fuels. The University of Colorado defines fossil fuels as energy resources like coal, oil, and natural gas, formed by the decomposition of animals over thousands of years. Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary defines dominance as controlling, prevailing, or powerful position. The pro side affirms that the resolution, by prioritizing the development of renewable energy resources and decreasing dependency on fossil fuels. As the resolution fails to specify a lone country, we should evaluate the resolution as it affects the world. Contention 1, fossil fuels have resulted in negative impacts on the Earth and its inhabitants. So fossil fuels have been the main power source for the world for 150 years and have been a large cause of pollution, mortality, and disease. First, the methods of extracting and producing fossil fuels pose major environmental and safety threats. In 2021, the Environmental and Energy Institute evaluated the environmental risk of oil, coal, and natural gas. They found that during the oil extraction and transportation, pipelines and offshore drilling wells often leak, causing thousands of oil spills yearly in the United States alone. One particularly impactful example is the 2010 BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, which released 3 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. continue to affect its ecosystem today. The research shows that coal ash is very difficult to recycle and can seep into waterways, polluting them. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that 130 million tons of coal ash are generated each year in the United States. Finally, the research also found that natural gas extracted by fracking requires between 1.5 million gallons to 16 million gallons of water per well. Fracking can often pollute waterways, create contaminated wastewater, and cause earthquakes. Also, fossil fuels have harmful effects on the inhabitants of the earth, regardless of whether it is humans or animals. They personally rely on fossil fuels. So research from Harvard graduates showed that globally 10.2 million deaths per year can be attributed to airborne particles from fossil fuels. The highest number of deaths are in countries that produce most fossil fuels: China, India, and the US. These deaths can be attributed to the fossil fuel component that is created during fossil fuel combustion, called PM 2.5. In 2012, China had notably high fossil fuel usage and averaged 3.9 million PM 2.5 related deaths. So, Contention Two, fossil fuels are not the only resource available to us, and alternatives have proven to be just as effective as fossil fuels while also being better for the earth. By using non-renewable resources as the main source of energy, we are running out of them and destroying where we live in the process. For example, Stanford University did a study where they found that at the current rate of consumption, oil will end by 2052, 30 years' time. Gas will end by 2060, 40 years' time, and coal will last until 2090, 70 years' time. There are alternate energy examples such as the sun. You can use solar power, wind, you can use wind turbine, water, hydroelectric such as dams, and many others. Research from the International Renewable Energy Agency showed that the technology to create renewable energy continuously costs less than the fossil fuel operations. Renewable energies provide a way to escape the regretful dominance of fuels while simultaneously meeting the global energy demand, creating more jobs, saving first to third world countries money, and saving the environment. Geoscience researchers Ritchie and Roser also found that the United States has the largest fossil fuel consumption per capita when compared to other countries, and it's not even close. The U.S. uses an average of 60,167 kilowatts per capita, whereas the rest of the world, including powerhouse countries, have greatly reduced their dependence on fossil fuels, and we are the ones who are running behind. This includes China at 23,674 kilowatts, and the UK with 21,000, and India with 6,000. The transition to renewable energy is entirely possible, and the rest of the world has already begun changing due to their admittance that depending on fossil fuels is a mistake. So it is time that we follow their lead. Today, the affirmative team believes that fossil fuels have a greater cost than benefit to us in our present day. With other options available, we should not take the easy way out at the cost of our planet.
All right, if you guys are ready. So that was thinking. I would like to talk about fossil fuels from our perspective. First of all, I'm going to define fossil fuels and regret and claim and things like that. So fossil fuels, I want to point out, is coal, oil, natural gas, but it's also, whatever makes these tables, these chairs, our cameras, our laptops, pharmaceuticals, really all kinds of things that we've grown dependent on. And so that would be fossil fuels, are really a bit more expansive than just the energy sources. And then regret is something that we're probably going to talk to you for a little bit about. It's, we are looking back and condoning something or condemning something, right? But change, I don't want to equal regret, right? So if we're going to make a shift in the future, which we can talk about here in a little bit, that shouldn't mean that we regret what fossil fuels has done. So fossil fuels really started in 1859. Edwin L. Drake, he made the first commercial oil rig, right, in Pennsylvania. And right then the population was 1.3 billion in the world. Infant mortality was at 181, life expectancy was 40 years. The world looked very different from where it does now. And there were many progressions in the world since that time, but a lot of them were due to fossil fuels. The infrastructure we have laid down, the asphalt that we laid all across America, the cars, the transportation, the pharmaceuticals, and all these materials, like I said, have greatly increased our value of life, our uses for materials. And so we have to look at what's happened in the past and where we are now. And it's okay and it's good to think about new ideas for the future. But if we're going to talk about this claim of, value and think about regret, then we have to look at what the world was and where we are today. And, if infant mortality of 181 looks like something that is acceptable, then sure, we can regret the use of fossil fuels. But to get where we are today as a society, we have to acknowledge that fossil fuels brought us somewhere. Also, I want to talk about just our contingencies. We're going to go over how fossil fuel, kind of the use of our economy and how it's kind of a cleaner fuel as opposed to what some developing countries are stuck with, right? It's also a backup. It's very good and efficient as a backup fuel in case those renewables need some help. And it's also very dense. It doesn't use as much land as some of our alternatives, right? Also, renewables are really great to look at and learn about, but a lot of that funding comes from big oil companies, because at the end of the day, they're energy companies, and so they're trying to stay relevant, right? So if there wasn't all that wealth and all that infrastructure in those companies, it would be very hard to get a lot of funding for the alternatives that we're allowed to play with today. I would like to refutate a couple of things. Not sustainable in our future, that's something that, like I said, we can talk about and we can think about what the future should be, but it really shouldn't speak much to what fossil fuels have done for our world and what life they've brought, what conditions they've brought to developing countries, to our country, and all over the globe, really. Also, as we said, coal, oil, natural gas is just really the tip of the iceberg with what fossil fuels has given to us. And there is an environmental risk, just like how there's an environmental risk with windmills and with laying solar panels all over an ecosystem. There are risks, and we can talk about the risks, but yeah, to regret the use of fossil fuels and to regret the innovations and the progression we've had as a society gets kind of dicey. Talking about the effects, yes, there have been effects, and yes, there are things in this world that don't work out, but I want to point back to the death that we've talked about and say that, without the use of fossil fuels that we have today, and we're going to hear about it a little bit more, there would be a little bit of a harder way to stay alive in this world. So we've gotten to a point where we can get into alternatives and renewables, but the groundwork was really laid by getting fossil fuels and getting to this point in society where we are. We can look at the ideas that fossil fuel is something that we have to pay for and we have to make a cost, but just because we're going to change and go into new ones, it really shouldn't mean that that's something that we can condone and shun that happened in our past, right? If I'm going to go out and I'm going to run and I'm going to wear like gym clothes and look bad, I'm not going to regret that I wore those clothes, and I'm not going to regret that I did that workout afterwards when I have the effects of it. So to change really doesn't mean we regret something. So that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, okay, ready?
So you mentioned that, your gym clothes, what you just said. Well, gym clothes don't kill millions. It's a little different. You can't really compare the two. You also mentioned that infant mortality has gone down because of fossil fuels, but that gone down because of modern medicine, not the fossil fuels. We could have used any energy for that. And I think if we also put more effort and time into researching how to use those renewable resources, then we'd be able to use them rather than having to fully rely on fossil fuels. The risk of, you're talking about the risk, you agree that there are risks with fossil fuels. There's risk with anything, like you said. However, we've seen the harmful things that we are going through in our environment. So the risk of solar and wind, they're nowhere near as harmful as it is to, be drilling in the oil, in the water, in the oceans. There's as making up dinosaurs, doing all that stuff. It's not nowhere near as harmful as that.
So would that risk be the same as how we might say that, and of course back in 2008 and stuff, people would say that vaping and stuff doesn't have a risk because we haven't seen the long-term effects. So it's yeah, that's true, we don't really see a risk, but it's also, we haven't been doing it for hundreds of years, right?
Well, we've seen the risk with the long term. We have seen the long term. That's the whole thing, is that maybe is that we have seen the long-term risk that have happened with fossil fuels, and I already mentioned, we only have a few more years left of the rate we're going at to be using these fossil fuels. Like, we only have a little bit of time left, and we won't, if we're completely just relying on that, what's going to happen whenever we run out? We won't have any research done for the non-renewables, or for the renewables, so then we're just kind of stuck.
So would you
not
say it's a
having
good
anything.
thing that we have the infrastructure and the funding in place right now from fossil fuels so that we can make a transition in the future?
That's why we regret it, because we could have used anything else.
Okay, so the thing is about like change and everything, we did have the opportunity to change a lot more quickly than we have. There's actually a lot of evidence that ExxonMobil lied about, like they knew about the effects of fossil fuels that they had on the climate, but they kept it under wraps. They kind of lied about it publicly. It's come out now, and organizations are going against them and everything, but they did lie, and we could have changed things much sooner, even without that one company. We could have changed over to renewables much sooner. It's just the fossil fuel industry is such a huge industry that it is hard. I'm not going to sit here and say that like we can change it with a snap. Like, let's all just like put our heads to the ground for a week and just get this done and change over entirely to renewable energy. It is going to be hard, but it is incredibly necessary for our environment. I know Leah was talking earlier about fossil fuels running out soon. There are facts that oil will run out by 2052, gas will run out by 2060, and coal will only last till 2090. Oil, they do have some reserves left, but still, by the end of this century, we're going to have nothing left to run off of. As you said, that fossil fuels are what got us here today, you're entirely correct with that. We wouldn't have the infrastructure that we do today, and unfortunately, we can't continue with that, and we did have the opportunity to change sooner, and we just haven't, just because it's a huge industry, and we can still move forward with new technology that we have now. And we should indeed regret what fossil fuels have done, because they've left our climate in a disastrous state. Sorry. So a huge thing about this is also that action needs to be taken now. There is a huge climate war going on, especially with everything going back with Biden not depending on Russia anymore for oil imports. We can just start now on building an entirely renewable energy system, so that we aren't relying on each other and getting into fights about it over fossil fuels that are destroying our climate anyway. I'm sorry, I lost my place. So let's talk about just how necessary it is that we immediately do take change now, because it is important. If we keep going the same way we will be going, our Earth will be damaged irreparably at that point. I'm sure you've heard about the 1.5 degrees thing, that by 2050 we need to limit our emissions and limit our warming to only 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, or we will just basically not be able to repair what we've done at that point. And the only way to do that is to cut back on fossil fuels, cut back on our waste, all of this. It puts out a toxic chemical called PM 2.5 that kills nearly 9 million people around the world each year from toxic air pollution. It also damages the working classes and everything, so it isn't clean at all, and renewables would not produce that much and hurt as many people with that.
Once again, we do not regret the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. We wouldn't be where we are today without fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have provided us an abundance of energy to advance us through the Industrial Revolution and create the lifestyle we get to live today. The technological and medicinal advancements allow us to have a healthy, long life expectancy. So back to our contention one, fossil fuels are safer than other alternatives of the past. Imagine a world where fossil fuels were never discovered. In order for us to cook food or create heat, we would need a different abundant resource. One resource that is plentiful in abundance is wood. Now, we don't actually have to think of this as a hypothetical situation because we have examples of humans who use wood as an energy source, and the outcome is detrimental to their health. Robert Rapier, a chemical engineer, recently did an interview that uncovered the dangers of using wood as a primary resource and how fossil fuels can save lives in developing countries. The interviewee states that during research, he found that most of the developing world uses wood as their primary source. Quote, every year, almost 4 million people die from household air pollution, which mostly comes from cooking, end quote. To put this into perspective, last year, 2 million people died from COVID-19, and we labeled that a catastrophe and put in huge efforts to stop it. In addition, wood burning reduces air quality, and in order to supply energy for everyone, we would be tearing down forests at an even higher rate than we currently do. Fossil fuels provide a cleaner cooking solution and have allowed us to cook food without endangering our lungs. Therefore, fossil fuels were the safer resource for us to rely on. Another powerful alternative to fossil fuels in the past is nuclear power. However, there are huge disadvantages to using nuclear power. First off, it's expensive. It's estimated to cost between $4 to $9 billion to build a nuclear power plant, and it gets more expensive once construction begins. Second, between accidents and radiation, it is a high death toll. Third, it's a security threat because it can become a nuclear weapon when in the wrong hands. Our second contention was fossil fuels remain essential to our economy. Fossil fuels are a cheap, affordable source of energy, and according to Mark Perry, an economics professor at the University of Michigan, coal, oil, and natural gas supply 81% of our energy demand. Currently, other energy resources cannot keep up with the current rate that we use power. Third contention is fossil fuels provide backup when alternatives fail us. Coal is a saving grace in the Midwest. During power outages, it supplies powerless individuals with the warmth to heat up their homes, which reduces fatalities. Fossil fuels are efficient. Burning a small amount releases a surprisingly large amount of energy, which is able to heat homes and run machines. And throughout history, renewable energy has been unpredictable. Wind turbines only work when there is an uninterrupted airflow, and when there is an uninterrupted airflow, these wind turbines can only harvest 60% of the total energy. To bring this closer to home, UNT has 3 wind turbines on campus, and they supply less than 1% of our energy. So I just wanted to point that out because the other side said that renewable energy is just as effective, but alternative energy requires more land. Wind and solar generation require at least 10 times more land per unit of power than fossil fuels. For example, wind power density is 100 times less than fossil fuels, so this raises concerns about what land we will use. In addition, renewables are only placed in locations where the source's availability is best located. Wind power is strongest in the Great Plains states, and solar power is strongest in the Southwest. With technology not up to par with providing energy for our entire country, fossil fuels have provided us the energy to feed our society and power our homes. While the other side argues for the dependence of renewable energy, we have not yet reached a time in history where renewables will be capable of producing enough energy to supply for everyone. Therefore, the only solution has been to rely on fossil fuels to provide us energy every day.
So you mentioned that earlier that wind turbines are finicky because they only work when there's a steady stream of wind, and then later kind of answered that. Wind turbines are put in like very windy places, just for a reason, so that there is a constant flow of that, and placed everywhere, so that if one place stops working, there's another. Same with like telephone lines. Now, if there's one telephone line down, there's still another one nearby that's working. And same with water turbines, of course. They're placed in water, or else it wouldn't work too well. Also, you were talking about wood as an alternative.
Yes.
I wouldn't say wood is the alternative to gas.
My point is, in history,
Right.
historically, that was the alternative until Europe began using coal in the 1800s. So before that, we used wood.
Right. So both are like not good for the environment, and with that kind of advancements, I realize that fossil fuels did get us where we are today, and but the thing is, technology is changing. We're not using the same technology as we did, burning wood in a fireplace. So why are we still using fossil fuels today when renewables are available?
They cannot supply the energy that we need right now. Maybe in the future, someday, we will have the technology to do that, but throughout history, thus far, we have not been able to supply energy for everybody.
But there already are renewable resources being placed. Maybe it's not like full scale yet, of course. It's a slowly like growing thing, but we are able to start mass producing renewable energy.
Correct, but the point of this debate is of the past. It's not in the future with what is going to come with renewable energy in the future. So for the sake of this argument, I'm going to say in the past we have not been able to do that. So we had to rely on fossil fuels and we don't regret it.
But so
Time.
okay.
Do you want the marker on or?
No, I'm okay. Alright, so our opponents have claimed that fossil fuels directly decreased mortality in the past. However, as we have already touched on, the PM2.5 related deaths, research from Harvard graduates shows that globally, 10.2 million deaths per year can be attributed to airborne particulate matter from fossil fuels. The highest number of deaths are in countries that produce the most fossil fuels, which we have been over. But the example of China is very notable because in 2012, China had notably high fossil fuel usage and averaged 3.9 million PM2.5 related deaths. But from 2012 to 2018, China experienced a 43.7% reduction in using the fossil fuels. And this resulted in a decrease of yearly premature deaths from their previous number being 3.9 million to going down to 2.4 million. So this clearly shows us that fossil fuels are not only killing our environment and our home planet, they are directly killing us. So how could they have been good for mortality if they have been proven to be killing us? As well as that, there are many fossil fuel workers who are injured or killed on the job. Every year, the people who work in our coal mines, natural gas fields, and oil rigs lose their lives or suffer from major injuries to provide fossil fuels that drive our economy. In April 2010, for example, 29 coal miners lost their lives at the tragic Massey mine explosion in West Virginia. 2 miners perished at a Western Kentucky mine accident, and 11 workers lost their lives from the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. So these jobs are very dangerous, and they are not at all improving our mortality, they're hurting people. As well as that, it was mentioned that these are not cost-effective, they're not good for the economy. However, research from the International Renewable Energy Agency shows that technology to create renewable energies consistently costs less than fossil fuels operations. So renewable operations provide a way to escape the clearly regretful dominance of fossil fuels, while also meeting the global energy demand, creating more jobs, saving first to third world countries money, and saving the environment. And a little more about jobs. They are very inconsistent in the fossil fuel industry because if an oil well dries up or there's no more coal to mine in one area, the workers have to go and find new jobs. It's not consistent. But with renewable resources, I mean, the consistency is in the name, it's renewable, we will never run out. There will always be jobs as long as there is sun, wind, and water. They are very reliable long-term. So obviously it has been mentioned that we cannot like suddenly switch over. You know, there are certain things that we will need to have like a backup of fossil fuels. And this is going to be a long-term process, a long-term solution. For example, y'all brought up wind turbines being made with fossil fuels, but they are not our only source of energy, and eventually with enough investment, we will be able to have wind turbines, solar, water, and any other renewable energy resources that are created, which can last us long-term, because as has been mentioned, we are going to run out of these, at least oil, in the next 50 years. So some of the advantages of these alternate methods are fewer emissions. As we know, our planet is dying, lower pollution in the ecosystem, and overall lower fuel prices because we will have other options, we'll have alternatives. Let's see. So people have said that we should not regret what fossil fuels have done. I'm sorry, I'm losing my track of thought. I won't be too long. So technology that got us here today has done endless harm to our planet. We have mentioned BP Blackwater. We have mentioned all of the effects that coal has polluting our air. We have discussed, sorry, it's taking me a minute to find it. That oil extraction and transportation results in offshore drilling wells often leak, and there are thousands of oil spills in the United States alone. So we can see the clear negative impacts of all of these fossil fuels, and it's clear that we have to change, and it's regrettable that we've been depending on them for this long.
For 1 second.
Yeah, let's start the clock.
Wait, how much time?
30 seconds.
You just want 30 seconds?
Yeah.
We just want 30 seconds. How
It's
much
okay.
time can we?
We have like a minute, I think.
Okay, yes. You want 30 seconds?
We do 45.
Okay, ready?
Cool.
Go.
Yeah.
So I think it's good, right?